How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Mike, and this is Mathematic Swords. And I got another sword for you guys to take a look at today. And I will give my impressions and my review of this really cool saber. So this is a 1904 Austrian Cavalry saber by Universal Swords of India. So I purchased mine from Cult of Athena a little while ago, and since then this sword has become entered onto the backordered list at Cult of Athena. So once again, I really apologize for the fact that if you do like this sword and you are interested, you're gonna have to be a little bit patient until Cult of Athena can get some more of these back into stock. I did not know that at the time of the filming of this review, so I do apologize, guys. However, I have seen swords from Universal Swords come in and out of stock at Cult of Athena, so there really is no reason for me to believe that this sword has been discontinued, but I can't guarantee it. If you go down to the specs here, overall length 40 1/8 inches, blade length 33.5 inches, so this is obviously a cavalry length sword. Weight 2 pounds 1.5 ounces. Mine weighed in less than that at about 2 pounds exactly. It does come unsharpened, which is a little bit of a downside. You're going to have to opt for the sharpening service if you are interested in purchasing this sword. It does have a degree of distal taper, not that much, but it is there. It is a nut construction, and we are looking at a 1065 high carbon steel blade. And as far as the heat treatment is concerned, we'll take a look at that in a little bit. However, the blade itself is actually very, very stiff and very rigid. So that would lend very good to thrusting, which is great because this is a cavalry sword. Also, it's a little bit more forgiving in the cut because it's not going to wobble around on you when you strike your target and throw your edge alignment off. So we're going to go into the cut testing in a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit about the design features of this blade, which is actually the thing that really drew me to buying this sword, because I did say it's a sword from the beginning of the 20th century, but for you guys who know your sabers out there, this is a blade design that goes pretty much all the way back to the first half of the 19th century. It is a pipe back design. Now, what that means is that the back of the blade is essentially a really thick rod section that goes all the way up to the tip, and there is no fuller in this blade. It just starts to taper right after that rod section, right down to the blade, right from the back of the blade. So the advantage is that you can get a very fine, sharp edge on this sword because there's a lot of taper before that actual cutting edge, and it actually lends itself to really good cutting. So the guard is quite modern looking, or modern for this particular era, I should say. It's a dish guard, or what they call a bowl guard, that has been perforated with all these holes to save weight. It is steel. I can imagine that the originals would have been probably better steel than this. I'm not really sure, but this steel, although it doesn't feel cheap, or it doesn't feel like it's going to dent easily or anything like that, I kind of feel like the originals would have had better steel, but hey, that's speculation because I haven't handled an original. And there is the nut, which is actually, I don't mind a nut construction if it's done nicely. This one is okay because a 10 millimeter wrench fits right on there very nicely, so if you do need to do some tightening, you can. And mine was not loose at all. I mean, it did require just a little bit of tightening after I did my testing, but it really wasn't that bad. Everything is actually quite solid, and as you can hear, I love that ring. Swords that are very loose, they actually won't make that ring. So that's actually pretty cool. Everything was very tight and solid. It is a sturdy, pretty durable sword, I do have to admit. So moving on to the grip, it has these ears, which is very much like the original. And I will show you pictures of the original in a second so you can see how closely Universal Swords captured the design aesthetics of the original sword. However, one thing that really disappoints me is the grip. This grip is plastic. And that really pisses me off because if this sword had had a real shagreen grip with some wood under there, I would have been much more pleased with this sword, generally speaking. However, they decided to cheap out and go with this plastic grip, which is, it doesn't look good. It doesn't necessarily feel good. It's just not good. And there are some hot spots here where the back strap meets the grip, because this is basically a molded plastic grip. It's not leather. It's not fit for this back strap very well. So there's some ledges here that can grab you. It didn't bother me too much when I was cutting. And although this is a cavalry sword, you know, you would be using gloves, apparently. Or I should say, yeah, you would be wearing gloves, so maybe you wouldn't feel that, but this ledge here does kind of suck, so I do have to get that out there. And you can see it's not very nicely fit, so there is some ledges here, which can bite into you. So the grip is definitely a downside of the sword. However, there aren't many other downsides to it. I do have to admit, I like the sword. I like the way it handles. For a cavalry sword, or a low budget reproduction of a cavalry saber, it handles very, very well. And I think that has to do with the blade design. I think the Austrians got it right with this pipe back design. I can imagine that the original handles much better than this does, but as it is, this sword is actually quite nimble. You could actually fence with this on foot. It is a little large and does definitely have a longer blade, but longer is actually better for reach. And it's a cool sword, guys. I have to admit, I really like the handguard. It offers a great degree of protection. As you can see, my hand is essentially fully covered. So if you were using this sword in combat, which obviously I never will, but if you were, you would have a great degree of hand protection. And swords of the later 19th century and early 20th century tended to have great hand protection in their guards, because they had learned throughout the 19th century that it's really important to protect your hands. Yeah, and it's perforated to save weight. Yeah, so let's get into the cut testing. I'll show you guys how I did with this. I really had a lot of fun cutting with it, and it performed rather well. Now, one thing to note before we get into the cuts is it did come sharpened by Cult of Athena, but the edge was not very good, which is not surprising. It had quite a steep secondary bevel, which out of the box, this sword actually did cut, which was surprising. But once I put my edge on it, it sharpened. It cut much, much better. And you'll see from the cut tests how easily it actually cuts. So yeah, let's get into it. The sword actually handled quite nicely, guys. It's very nimble, which is surprising because it is a cavalry sword, and a lot of these reproduction cavalry swords can be very heavy and hard to handle. So yeah, as you can see, I moved it around really no problem there. It just cut through the bottles extremely well, and I think that has a lot to do with this type of blade design. And there's not a lot of mass behind this edge. So although there is a secondary bevel here, which I'm sure you can clearly see, the mass directly behind the blade is minimal. So it cut fairly well. Oh, there's my newborn waking up from her nap. Anyway, it cut very, very well, I should say, through bottles. I didn't have any tatami at the time. I have some on order, for my next test, so I wasn't able to try it on tatami, but I can imagine that it would cut very well. And the fact that it's a very thin blade allows for some very good cutting. And like I said, it handled very nicely. I was very surprised at the handling characteristics. Now, it is blade heavy, but it should be. It is a cavalry sword, but it's not unmanageable or unwieldy. And I was very, very pleased with that, guys. I do have to admit it. It definitely shocked me. So it also has a very acute yet reinforced tip. So if you were to actually do some thrusting with this sword, I can imagine that it would penetrate very, very well because it's a thick tip, but it's also very, very sharp. Now, mine weighed in at 926 grams, which is not heavy for a cavalry saber at all. In fact, it's quite historical. A lot of originals from many different countries weighed in at that weight. Some of them a lot more, some of them less, but that's actually quite a an acceptable weight for this type of sword. Now I told you that I would show you some pics of the originals. Here's an original one. These are not very common on the collector's market, so I did actually try to find an original because I do want one for my collection, but they are not common at all, and the ones that I have seen tend to be kind of pricey, probably because of their scarcity. But yeah, you can see that Universal Swords did actually a very good job capturing the aesthetics. I mean, I'm very pleased with that. Overall, I think generally speaking, they do a good job with their aesthetics. Now, an interesting thing to note about the blade steel. I'm sorry, guys, I have bad allergies right now, and in New England, we're going through a transition in seasons, and it always wreaks havoc on my allergies. So sorry if I sound nasally. But interesting thing to note about this blade is that Universal Swords used a 1065 high carbon. Now, they don't usually use that blade steel. They usually use an EN9 or an EN45 steel, which is not very good in my experience. Not very good for a functional sword. Fine for like a decorative purpose or wall hang or even a very, very light cutting sword. But for swords that I consider to be fully functional, that's not a good blade steel. So I was very surprised to see that Universal Swords was using a 1065 high carbon steel blade. Now, that being said, this is not the best heat-treated blade that I've seen, and the reason why I know that is I did have some bad cuts on some 2-liter bottles, and for anyone who's done cutting on 2-liter bottles with swords, you know that if you deliver a bad cut and you baseball bat that thing off the stand, it's a lot of shock and resistance on your sword, and it has bent many a swords in the past. And this sword actually did have a slight bend in it. It was like a general overall bend after delivering a few bad cuts. Now, I bent it back quite easily, and it wasn't a drastic bend, but it was there. That's just one thing to note, that there might be a little bit of a questionable heat treatment on this blade. It wasn't that big of a deal, but I do suspect that if I did more abusive testing on this sword, that the blade would definitely take a set. But the good thing is that it didn't break, and that it did actually bend right back into place, and is actually it's still fine. Now, it did come with a steel scabbard, just like the original, with the fixed hoop here. One fixed hoop, which is definitely period accurate, and it does have another hoop right here. So they did a pretty good job on the scabbard. I mean, it's quite basic. It's a steel scabbard. The sword fits very nicely in it. No complaints about it, really. It's nice that you actually get it. Generally speaking, they do a good job on these. So, yeah, it fits quite nicely in the scabbard. And no rattling whatsoever. It's a very nice fit. I think they put a vinyl liner in there to sort of keep things tight and hold everything into place. Yeah, so That's pretty much all I have to say about it. It is a very interesting historical design, and that's why I bought it. Do I recommend it? If you're into this kind of sword and you're into this type of design, it's really the only option out there. There's nothing else in this price category, or even in higher price categories, that is even like this. I don't think there are any other manufacturers producing this sword, which is really the benefit to Universal Swords. I mean, they have a wide array of sabers for purchase from all different nations and all different time periods. And like I said, to find a 1904 Austrian cavalry saber in reproduction form in and itself is actually very cool. Now, in terms of its quality and build construction, it's okay. I mean, it's a $255 sword, so it's not the best. One thing I wish that is just unacceptable for me is the plastic grip construction and sort of cheaping out on the grip details here. I think if they had done even a fake leather grip wrapped tightly with some wire and stuff that I've seen them do in the past, this would be sort of like an A+ sword. But the fact that they didn't do that, and the fact that the heat treatment is a little bit questionable, kind of makes me hesitant to recommend this to somebody who is looking for, a fully functional, good saber for backyard cutting. Now, it's also a cavalry saber, so very few people are riding around on horses trying to master the art of swordsmanship on horseback. So that I also understand, that if you want a little bit of a lighter, more nimble sword, this may not be for you. However, I found it very interesting to use on foot, and actually it was quite easy to use on foot. So I found the handling to be pretty good. A little bit heavy, but not exceptionally heavy where you can't wield it. In fact, a lot lighter than other swords, reproduction cavalry sabers that I've seen, and much more nimble. So overall, guys, I would have to say, if you're into this kind of thing, this might be something for you to consider. Just keep in mind that there are some cheap components to it. Durability-wise, it held up okay for me, besides the bent blade, which, is kind of to be expected from a sword in this low-budget category. So, yeah, if you like what you see here, go and check out, see if you can get a hold of one. And I don't think you'll be disappointed, but if you're looking for a much more durable, much more historically accurate piece, then this is definitely not going to be for you. So, yes, thanks for coming by, guys. I realized this was a little bit of a quick and rushed review, and not as in-depth as some of my other ones, but I wanted to get this one out of the way because I want to move on to some other stuff. And I did not want to forget this piece because I did think it was worth mentioning for people who like military sabers and are looking for a little bit cost-efficient options that are out there. So thanks for coming by, guys. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for my next review. I have a very exciting review coming up next. It's a sword that I've been wanting to review for a while, so I'm putting a little bit more effort into the next review because I really want to show you guys the features and the aspects of this upcoming sword. Thanks for coming by, guys. Stay tuned. Please subscribe if you like this video, and please leave a like or a comment down below if you want to talk about this sword. I can give you some extra information and some extra feedback on what I think about it. Thank you very much, guys. Please stay safe and have a nice day. Bye.